Jeff about. I talk to my wife about it too, you know, when she wants to listen to me rant about geopolitical shit. That the terrifying thing is, you don't want, you don't want, if you're a lover of freedom and just not bullies. I'm not saying you have to worship at the altar of, you know, yellow and blue. I'm not saying you have to be like, Ukraine is the best country that's ever been a country, but I'm saying like the invasion of Ukraine by Russia for any reason besides self-defense, which is obviously not self-defense, is bad. I think that's a pretty safe take, right? And while I am super ecstatic and happy and just over the moon that this counterattack by Ukraine is going so well before the winter and before there's a stop to hostilities, because you just can't operate in the winter. I am worried that, I almost said the Soviet Union, that if Russia can't find a win, you know, a air quote win out of this, a way to save face, that they're going to escalate, which that's not even a if, they are escalating. The way that they are talking about, you know, Putin's talking about, oh, we're going to annex the territory that we've already taken and, you know, just say that's Russia. We're going to have a vote. Bullshit. The vote's going to be bullshit, but they're going to say, oh, this is now our territory, right? And that is dog shit. And they're saying if you attack our territory, now you've attacked Russia proper, and we can use all, you know, it's a nuclear threat. We can use all available means of quote unquote defense to hold our territory, you know, to hold our territory that we've stolen. That's bullshit. And on one end, you want to be like, you have to remember that there's people living there, and these aren't just, you know, pieces on a risk board. There's people whose life and death, you know, are affected by this. But even if that's the case, let's pretend for a moment. Let's not think about the human costs. Let's think about it as they are, you know, pieces on a chessboard, on a risk board, and you're just, you know, moving blue and red pieces around. You can't let a bully do this. Like, you can't annex territory. Like Crimea, we let it, like when NATO let him get away with Crimea, that was bullshit. And it just showed that he would push further. And I don't like the comparison to everything is Hitler and everything is Nazi Germany. I don't like that. But this is the same scenario that Europe and the West let Hitler just appease, let him push for living space. And then finally he's trying to take over all of Europe because no one pushed back. So I don't want the world to end. I don't want Vladimir Putin to get one off. But also, you can't take territory, my dude. Like, you can't just annex shit because you feel like it. I say the same thing about, you know, I've said this before on the stream. The reason that Russia has, that they somehow have dominion over Ukraine, is absolutely ridiculous. The idea that the equivalent to that, and I'll say it again, would be, I live in Louisiana and I live in New Orleans. So if Emmanuel Macron, the president of France, said, you know what, there's a lot of French speaking people in Louisiana, which there are. They're culturally our brethren. Also, there's some Nazis in the U.S. military. And Donald Trump was president and was a racist, and now Joe Biden is doing the same racist policies. Therefore, we're going to liberate Louisiana. And the Louisiana Purchase was a mistake as well. That was all. Yeah, we're taking that back. And because it was ours once before the Louisiana Purchase, we're taking Louisiana back now. We're going to liberate Louisiana. and you have to listen to us and take us seriously because France is a nuclear power, that would be fucking absurd. And that's the exact reasoning that Russia wants to annex, has annexed the Donbass, has annexed Crimea, and wants to annex, all of Ukraine if they could. That's the reasoning they're giving. I believe the real reasoning is, this has been said a million times by people smarter than me, that they don't want a NATO country, on their border. Which, okay, I can understand that, because NATO's whole purpose is to bottle Russia up. It was to bottle the Soviet Union up and to also bottle the influence of now, the country of Russia up. And that might be unfair and mean, and we should all hold hands and be a global, be as one and trade freely and have safe, normal relations with all countries. But at the end of the day, that's tough titties. Like that sucks to be you, man. Like the idea that a club was made because they don't want you in it doesn't give you the justification to burn down the clubhouse. Put it that way. But things are escalating and things are spooky. And I'm worried that if Vladimir Putin and the Russian military can't get some kind of a win out of this, which I don't want them to get any kind of a win, but I want them to have some kind of moralistic, some kind of, show victory to where they can go back home and be like, yeah, we did it, guys. Because now that they're getting counterattacked and they're getting, fucked over, now we're going into, partial mobilization of the army, meaning that, according to Vladimir Putin, meaning that reservists and people who were in the military before have to go back in. They're recruiting criminals. I'm reading that. It's crazy. It's like, and that partial mobilization, that's just the heat that's the frog in the pot and the heat being turned up to do full mobilization. And it's scary because, again, I don't want to see Russia collapse as a country. I don't want that. But it looks like, it's wobbly over there. People are getting pissed off. They don't like war, which good for them. And also, I don't want Vladimir Putin to feel trapped and his only recourse is to get a nuke off and fucking end the world, because that's what we're talking about when we're talking about thermonuclear warfare. You get one off, NATO's going to respond, and it's bye-bye Earth at that point. So let's read some news. This is coming from the AP, and then we'll watch some videos about it, and then we'll talk about Twitch gambling, which I find, because I myself am a degenerate gambler. I still call myself a degenerate gambler, and gambling bad. Put it that way. Like, I enjoy it. It's not good, folks. So we'll talk about it. But this is from the AP. Putin orders partial military call-up, sparking protests. Russian President Vladimir Putin ordered a partial mobilization of reservists Wednesday to bolster his forces in Ukraine, a deeply unpopular move that sparked rare protests across the country and led to almost 1,200 arrests. God damn. And if you're protesting in Vladimir Putin's Russia, like, it's serious shit over there. Let's see. This risky order follows humiliating setbacks for Putin's troops nearly 7 months after they invaded Ukraine. The first such call-up in Russia since World War II heightened tensions with Ukraine's Western backers, who derided it as an act of weakness and desperation. The move also sent some Russians scrambling to buy plane tickets to flee the country. I've heard that there's countries on the Russian border that are not going to take Russians. Like they're going to turn them away, which is fucking terrifying. These people should be allowed. These people should have asylum and be able to get the fuck. I'm thinking myself, I'm 41. I was in the United States Marine Corps. I can think of myself like having a fucking, if I lived in Russia right now with the same career path, like I'd be trying to dip out. because they're calling me up, They're calling people like me up who served in the Russian military. In his 14-minute nationally televised address, Putin also warned the West that he isn't bluffing about using everything at his disposal to protect Russia. In apparent reference to his nuclear arsenal, he previously rebuked NATO countries for supplying weapons to Ukraine. Confronted with steep battlefield losses, expanding front lines, and a conflict that has raged longer than expected, the Kremlin has struggled to replenish its troops in Ukraine, reportedly even resorting to widespread recruitment in prisons. What the fuck? Let's click on this link. Let's hear about this shit. This is like right out of a movie. This is some Dirty Dozen shit. Whoa. I want to read about this prison thing. The prisoners at the penal colony in St. Petersburg were expecting a visit by officials, thinking it would be some sort of inspection. Instead, men in uniform arrived and offered them amnesty if they agreed to fight alongside the Russian army in Ukraine. Over 7 days, about a dozen or so left the prison, according to a woman whose boyfriend is serving a sentence there. Speaking on condition of anonymity, because she feared reprisals, said her boyfriend wasn't among the volunteers. Although with years left on his sentence, he could not think about it. As Russia continues to suffer losses in its invasion of Ukraine, now nearing its 6 months. It feels like it's been going on forever. It's only been going on for 6 months. It feels like going on for 6 years. The Kremlin has refused to announce a full-blown mobilization, a move that could be very unpopular for President Vladimir Putin, that has led to a covert recruitment effort that includes using prisoners to make up the manpower shortage. That's going to be great. Can you imagine being Russian regular army and they fucking spring some fucking guy out of jail and you're like, gotta serve with him? That feels like shit. That feels like a place I don't want to be. This is also happening amid reports that hundreds of Russian soldiers are refusing to fight and trying to quit the military. No shit. We're seeing a huge outflow of people who want to leave the war zone. Those who have been serving for a long time and those who have signed a contract just recently, said Alexei Tabalov, a lawyer who runs the conscript school legal aid group. I mean, if you're going to like take off your uniform and slip into the populace, if you're a Russian soldier, this seems like the best case scenario. Because like, think about the last big war that Russia was in. It was Afghanistan, right? Also bullshit. But if you're in the Russian side, like you can't just take your uniform off, grow a beard, throw on some kind of head wrap and just disappear into the desert. Like you can't do that. But you could disappear into a Ukrainian war zone. People there speak Russian already. People there look like you. People's papers have been lost, destroyed. It's a war zone, right? This would be the one. This would be the one to walk away and just disappear and start a whole new life. Let's see. Although the the group has seen an influx of requests of men who want to terminate their contracts, and I personally get the impression that everyone who can is ready to run away. Damn. Tabalov said in an interview with the AP, and the Defense Ministry is digging deep to find those it can persuade to serve. Although the Defense Ministry denies that any immobilization activities are taking place, authorities seem to be pulling out all the stops to bolster enlistment. Billboards and public transit ads in various regions proclaim, "This is the job." This is definitely a job. This is the job. This is a job. This is work. Urging men to join the professional army. Authorities have set up mobile recruiting centers in some cities, including one at the site of a half marathon in Siberia in May. Half marathon in Siberia? Half? Those two, that sentence doesn't sit with me. Half marathon in Siberia. I don't want to run into the Russian people. I don't want any smoke with any Russian running a half marathon in Siberia. I don't want any problems with them. Regional administrations are forming volunteer battalions that are promoted on state television. The Daily Business Commerçant, I don't know. The Business Daily Commerçant, so it's a newspaper, I guess, counted at least 40 such entities in 20 regions, with officials promising volunteers monthly salaries ranging from the equivalent of $2,150 to nearly $5,500 plus bonuses. The AP saw thousands of job openings on search websites for various military specialists. The British military said this week that Russia had formed a major new ground force called the 3rd Army Corps from volunteer battalions seeking men up to age 50. Fuck that. Up to age 50, son. It's bad. Russia is getting his clock clean. This is like Stalin-esque, like not one step back type shit. At least, I mean, then it was righteous, you know, not one step back. We either hold Stalingrad or we die here. Like that was righteous. This is foolish. My nose is running. Why? I had hot sauce. I just ate some salmon and I had hot sauce, so I guess that's why it's running. Other than that, I have no clue what's going on with my nose. Where was I? I lost my place. Plane tickets. Oh no, I was reading. Okay, I'm on the wrong thing. That's why. But complaints are also surfacing in the media that some aren't getting their promised payments. No shit. I mean, yeah, it seems about right. Although those reports can't be independently verified. In early August, Tablov said he began receiving multiple requests for legal help from reservists who had been ordered to take part in a 2-month training in areas near the border of Ukraine. Goddamn, Marine Corps boot camp for me was 3 months long. Can you imagine 2 months and you go right to war? People trying to, like, they're firing shots off at you in anger. The recruitment of prisoners has been going on in recent weeks in as many as 7 regions, said Vladimir Oseskin, founder of the Gulagu.net prisoners' rights group, citing inmates and their relatives that his group had contacted. It's not the first time that authorities have used such a tactic, with the Soviet Union employing prisoner battalions during World War II. Like I said, not one step back. Nor is Russia alone. Early in the war, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky promised amnesty to military veterans behind bars if they volunteered to fight. Damn. Well, I mean, but see, this makes sense as the defender, just like it made sense with the Soviets. You know, as the defender, you have to pull out all the stops, especially when you're getting blitzed on. So this makes complete sense. Like, yeah, if, again, as much as like America sucks, if there was a foreign invasion force trying to take over, if the France was trying to liberate Louisiana, then yeah, give me an AR. You know, I know how to shoot. I know how to fight. You know, I know how to read a map. I can call for fire. Give me an AR and I'm gonna shoot. I'm gonna red dawn this shit. But like that's because we're the defender. Now, offensively, if there's some shitty offensive war that America wants to get into, and they're like, "Well, you got military, fuck off. I gotta go to jail first." In current circumstances, Osechkin said it isn't the military defense ministry that's recruiting prisoners. Instead, it was Russia's shadowy private military force, the Wagner Group. Holy shit. There's a link to that, too. I wonder if that's interesting. Russian mercs. Yeah, this is the worst, like, Marvel Civil War, free all the evil Brotherhood of Evil Mutants from the negative zone or whatever, and have them hunt down. This is the most like comic book shit where they're just like, the mercenary group is going to the mercenary group is going to recruit from the prisons to go fight a foreign war. This is insane. It's so, I wouldn't believe that unless I was, reading it with my own eyes. According to Osechkin, prisoners with military or law enforcement experience were initially offered to go to Ukraine, but later this offer was extended to inmates with varying backgrounds. He estimated that as of July, 1,500 might have applied, lured by promises of big salaries and eventual pardons. Now, he added, many of those volunteers or their families are contacting him and seeking to get out of their commitments, telling them, I really don't want to go. According to the woman whose boyfriend is serving his sentence at the penal colony in St. Petersburg, the offers to leave the prison are a glimmer of hope for freedom, but he said he told her of that 11 volunteers, 8 died in Ukraine. She added that one of the volunteers expressed regret for his decision and doesn't believe that he will return alive. Her account couldn't be independently verified, but was in line with multiple reports by independent Russian media and human rights groups. According to these groups and military lawyers, some soldiers and law enforcement officials have refused deployment to Ukraine or trying to return home after a few weeks or months of fighting. Media reports about some troops refusing to fight in Ukraine started surfacing in the spring, but rights groups and lawyers only began talking about the number of refusals reaching the hundreds last month. In mid-July, the Free I cannot read this Russian. Buryatia Foundation reported that about 150 men were able to terminate their contracts with the defense ministry and return from Ukraine to Buryatia, a region in eastern Siberia that borders Mongolia. Yeah, I'd be trying to get out of there too. Damn, that seems a wild place to live. Some of the servicemen are facing repercussions. Tabalov, the legal aid lawyer, said to about 80 other soldiers sought to nullify their contracts were detained in the Russian-controlled town of Bryanka in the Luhansk region of eastern Ukraine. According to her relatives last week, he said that Bianca Jesus, deflection was shut down because of the media attention. I'm kind of done with this. I just want to see if there's anything super interesting. We want to talk about Russian mercenaries? Jesus Christ. This is Metal Gear Solid. This is Metal Gear Solid 4, am I wrong? Like, this feels like the plot of Metal Gear, where it's just PMC corporations fighting these weird fucking proxy wars. Dakar, Senegal, when abuses were reported in recent weeks in Mali, fake graves designed to discredit French forces, a massacre of 300 people, mostly civilians. All evidence point to the shadowy mercenaries of Russia's Wagner group. Even before these feared professional soldiers joined the assault in Ukraine, Russia deployed them under the radar military operations and across at least half dozen African countries. Their aim to further Vladimir Putin's global ambitions and to further undermine democracy. The Wagner Group passes itself off as a PMC, a private military contractor, and the Kremlin denies any connection to it or even that it exists. But Wagner's commitment to Russian interests has become apparent in Ukraine, where its fighters seen wearing the group's chilling white skull emblem are among Russian forces currently attacked. Why would they have an emblem? Like, if you're supposed to be... Why would you have gang shit? Why would you have gang bullshit? Dude, imagine being a merc. That's fucking wild, dog. How do you sleep? How do you sleep at night? I mean, I guess, well, like, you sleep on, like, a pillowcase stuffed with $100 bills, but damn, dog, a merc? You just out there killing people for money? Bruh. Out there just living that Soldier of Fortune magazine life. Some wild shit. Let's get back to see if there's anything more interesting. Oh, the protests. Okay, so we're back to the protests today. During Russia's harsh laws against criticizing the military and the war, protesters outraged by the mobilization overcame their fear of arrests to stage protests in cities across the country. Nearly 1,200 Russians were arrested in anti-war demonstrations, including Moscow and St. Petersburg, according to independent Russian human rights group OVD Info. Associated Press journalists in Moscow witnessed at least a dozen arrests within the first 15 minutes of a nighttime protest in the capital. The police in heavy body armor tackling demonstrators in front of shops, hauling some of them away. They chanted "No to war." I'm not afraid of anything. The most valuable thing they can take from us is the life of our children. I won't give them my life. I won't give them the life of my child, said one Moscovite, who declined to give her name. Asked whether protesting would help, she said, "It won't help, but it's my civic duty to express my stance, no to war." Let's see. One woman in a wheelchair shouted, referring to the Russian president, "Goddamn bald-headed nut job. He's going to drop a bomb on us, and we're all still protecting him. I've had enough." The Vesna opposition movement called for protests, saying thousands of Russian men, our brothers, fathers, and husbands, be thrown in the meat grinder for the war. What will they be dying for? What will the mothers and children be crying for? I mean, everything they're saying is 100% correct here. The Moscow prosecutor's office warned that organizing or participating in protests could lead up to 15 years in prison. Authorities have issued similar warnings ahead of other protests. Wednesdays were the first nationwide anti-war protests. Other Russians responded by trying to leave the country, and flights out quickly became booked. This is scary, dude. This is scary. Again, because if Putin is losing power, there's no telling of what he might do. Terrifying shit. Let's watch a video about the protests. This is from Deutsches Welle, the German news source. Whoops, didn't want to do that. We wanted window capture. All right, let's watch this.
Have arrested more than 1,000 people protesting against the mobilization of reservists to fight in Ukraine. President Vladimir Putin is calling up an extra 300,000 backup personnel. He says the mobilization is aimed at liberating the eastern Donbass region, where Ukrainian forces are staging a counteroffensive. Western leaders say the call-up is in response to Russian losses on the battlefield.
Vladimir Putin's latest decree is not going unchallenged in Russia. But the state's crackdown is hard nonetheless. A protest monitoring group says mass arrests have been made across the country, including in Moscow.
I'm not afraid. I'm not afraid of anything. The most valuable thing that they can take from us is the lives of our children. I won't give them my child's life.
Putin has called the mobilization necessary and urgent. He accused the West of crossing a line by providing sophisticated weapons to Ukraine.
I'd like to remind you that our country also has various weapons of destruction, and in certain aspects even more modern weapons than NATO countries. If there's a threat to the territorial integrity of our country, in order to protect Russia and our people, we will certainly use all the means at our disposal. This is not a bluff.
Damn. That's just straight up.
Has also
That's just straight up out
in
in the world.
Of people unwilling
give
to join the
me
conflict.
Crimea and the Donbass are all in the world.
Many of these Russians
What a piece
arriving
of
in
shit.
Serbia are still fearful of speaking in opposition to the war.
I speak with you and I'm afraid because my government and police can see it and I will have problem in my country. But I want to say freedom for Ukraine. I want to, please, somebody stop Putin.
Damn. You can see how scared she
Prices
is.
of one-way flights
You
from
can
Russia
see how
has been
terrified she is just to
skyrocketing
talk
since
on
Putin's speech.
record.
And they're still selling out fast.
A short while ago, I asked Andras Raj of the German Council on Foreign Relations what he made of Putin's mobilization.
Well, this move constitutes a major change in how Russia has been waging this war. before this mobilization, from Russia's perspective, mostly such Russian personnel was fighting in Ukraine who chose to do so. Professional soldiers, contracted soldiers, mercenaries, and voluntarily mobilized territorial units. However, from now on, with the mobilization, large segments of the Russian society will get directly affected, basically by force, by coercion. So from now on, participation in the war for the average Russian will not be a voluntary thing, but something which the state pushes him to do so. This is a major change for the Russian society.
Yeah, and it brings the war a lot closer to home for the Russian population, doesn't it? This is not going down well. We've seen protests already today, people scrambling to leave the country. Why would Putin risk this kind of backlash?
Most probably the Russian leadership calculates that protests will die down quite quickly, or if not, they could be repressed. And anyways, we are talking about a country of 140 million. A few thousands are protesting in a few cities, and hundreds of these few protesters are getting arrested. So probably the Kremlin calculates that it can quickly repress or at least manage the dissatisfaction of the society so the mobilization can go on.
It's no secret, though, that the Russian army is already struggling to equip the troops it has in Ukraine at the moment. Does it even have the resources to train, incorporate, dress, and arm 300,000 more soldiers?
This is one of the largest question marks about the whole mobilization. I mean, it's not only about calling in the men. Just as you said, you have to train them, you have to equip them, you have to transport them to the front line. The most important bottleneck of all these is actually the training, because those professional and contract soldiers who could train these newly coming reservists are actually either fighting in Ukraine or are already wounded and dead. So it's a big question mark whether Russia will be able to provide these reservists with the sufficient training. And if not, I'm quite afraid that these freshly mobilized Russian men will be sent to the front line with improper training, meaning that heavy losses are likely to occur among them. So
you don't believe this will be a game changer?
Actually, what I believe is that by putting additional 300,000 soldiers on the front line, but reservists improperly trained, improperly equipped, it will not be a game changer. It will just be more of the same, a lot more of the same, however.
This very thinly veiled nuclear threat he aimed at the West in his address earlier today, how concerned should we be about that?
I wouldn't be too much concerned about this nuclear threat. In terms of content, it did not really differ from the previous nuclear saber rattling that the Russian leadership has done a few times already. It constitutes a bit of a change, though, because ever since the beginning of the summer, Russia has not mentioned the possibility of using nuclear weapons. So we had basically kind of a 3-month period of a lull, of silence about nuclear weapons. Now Putin again came up with this narrative. However, the good news is that there are no signs that Russia would actually mobilize its nuclear forces.
Andras Rasch of the German Council on Foreign Relations. Thank you so much.
Go back to that just a sec.
From the previous nuclear saber
hold on.
With improper training, meaning that heavy losses are likely to occur.
This is what matters to us. This is what we care about.
So you don't believe this will be a game changer?
I mean, I do care about, I want all the people in Russia not to have to go to a pointless war. I want all the people in Ukraine to have security and safety and not live in a war zone. But as far as what matters materially to me as an American, I want to hear this.
Actually, what I believe is that by putting additional 300,000 soldiers on the front line, but reservists improperly trained, improperly equipped, it will not be a game changer. It will just be more of the same, a lot more of the same, however.
This very thinly veiled nuclear threat he aimed at the West in his address earlier today, how concerned should we be about that?
I wouldn't be too much concerned about this nuclear threat. In terms of content, it did not really differ from the previous nuclear saber rattling that the Russian leadership has done a few times already.
But the situation on the ground is
different. It constitutes a bit of a change, though, because ever since the beginning of the summer, Russia has not mentioned the possibility of using nuclear weapons. So we had basically kind of a 3-month period of a lull, of silence about nuclear weapons. Now Putin again came up with this narrative. However, the good news is that there are no signs that Russia would actually mobilize its nuclear forces.
Andras Rasch,
I don't.
the German Council on Foreign Relations.
I'm not feeling that, because the thing is, the situation on the ground is different. Even if it's the same saber rattling as before, well, the situation is desperate. So, nuclear weapons, you don't use nuclear weapons out of strength. You have them as a deterrent, out of desperation. You know. Nah, I don't feel this guy. I'm not saying that we're on the brink of nuclear annihilation. I'm just saying I think it's more serious than what he is leading on. Let's watch this video by this guy that I am sub to, Vlad Vlexler. He is a political scientist from I don't even know where, but I like his content, and he's got a good video about the mobilization.
I've never seen Putin this nervous, in as much of a pickle. Ukraine's forces have broken through Russian lines. And the radicals at home who want to subjugate Ukraine with fire are squealing about the fleeing Russian army. In a sign of how badly Putin is losing the war, he has threatened nuclear war and ordered partial mobilization of reservists to go and fight in Ukraine. In this video, we're gonna see that partial mobilization is a lie, a fig leaf, just an opaque step along Putin's journey of balancing wanting a passive and an activated population at the same time. Unless Putin is prepared to use nuclear weapons to keep power or even stay alive, he may well need to escalate his partial mobilization, telling Russians to go and fight. But here's the problem. This is Putin's base. Over the years, he's kept them out of politics, and their absence from politics is what guarantees Putin's regime's stability. They passively support the war, but they...
This, as an American, I completely understand. I completely understand what he's saying here. Because America, one of the intended consequences of having an all-volunteer army or military here in America is that the populace doesn't have any buy-in to any kind of military conflict as a whole, like we did back when there was mobilization, like World War II and Vietnam, to where the people who sign up for the military go fight the wars, or at least if you're reservist or whatever, you go fight the wars. But if you don't raise your right hand and you don't go down to the recruiting station, you're not going to go to war. So we in America passively put up with America's war crimes and its empire and its war machine, because during when we had the draft and we were in Vietnam and everybody had skin in the game, Americans did not put up with American imperial aggression, because they knew that they would be the ones having to go fight and die for the empire. That's why I've said this as a joke before, but I'm not. It's joking, not joking. I've said this on the Good Morning Comrade podcast. If I was president of the United States, one of the first things I would do is I'd bring back the draft. Not because I want people to go to war. It's because if we do go to war, I would want the ability of the populace to put pressure on the government to decide what conflicts are worth going into and which ones are not. I want a situation like Vietnam, to where if America tries to expand its empire and goes into these foreign folly wars like in Afghanistan and Iraq, I want people burning their draft cards. I want them to feel like they have skin in the game, and if we go somewhere and fight a dumb war, that they could be the ones dead or maimed or PTSD'd or traumatic brain injured or whatever. So that's why I'm not a fan of an all-volunteer military, because it creates a populace like this that is uninvested and passive to an empire's goals, designs, bloodshed, bloodletting, and murder and conflicts.
Don't want to fight. They are couch warriors. Politically, Putin needs them on the couch. Militarily, he needs them in Ukraine. In this video, we'll explore the extraordinary, surreal drama playing out as Putin grapples with this remarkable dilemma he's created for himself, which he could either muddle through or which could end his reign. This is Prigozhin, the man called Putin's chef. Prigozhin is a confidant of Putin's, and he runs the Wagner Group, which is a state-backed private
Hey, we
army
talked about these
mercenary
mercenaries, right?
group that operates in Ukraine, in Syria, in Africa. In
They
this
seem
video, we're
pretty
going to see
terrifying.
Prigozhin is on a tour of prisons and penal colonies. Prigozhin's deal is 6 months of service in Ukraine, and if you survive and don't run away, in which case you'll be executed, you're then pardoned and set free. That's a promise, not a guarantee.
Война тяжелая, на всякие там чеченские и так далее. Близко не похоже. У меня есть ЧВК.
My private military company has
Есть
planes,
РСЗО, есть танки,
LRSs,
есть всё,
tanks,
что
everything is
необходимо. Через
necessary.
полгода уходите домой.
You go home and you get
Те, кто
pardoned.
приезжает и в первый день говорит, куда-то я не
You
туда
know, Jordan
попал,
says it's not for
делаем
me,
ответственность.
is designated deserter, and execution by shooting follows.
Но не всегда живыми
I
возвращаются.
get you out of here alive, but I
Russia
don't
has
always
tried
bring you
to
back
attack
alive.
Ukraine with
Holy
its army,
shit.
and now it's going to try to attack Ukraine with
It's wild over there.
But let's just reflect on this properly. Imagine if Britain were gathering up convicts to attack France. How nuts this is. It shows a desperate need for manpower. It shows mafioso quality to the Russian state. And we've got to be clear, if this were a country with free media and that was happening in it, then that would be the most poetic demonstration you could imagine of military catastrophe. And this illustrates the extraordinary emptiness of Putin's colonial project. What is he offering Ukraine? Except violence and poorly glued together remnants of fascist rhetoric. This is Ramzan Kadyrov, the dictator of Chechnya.
That guy's a
And
piece
by
of
the way,
shit.
Chechnya is a part of Russia in which the Kremlin does not have monopoly over organized violence. Kadyrov has his own army too, and you'd probably know them as the TikTok warriors because they're incessantly filming themselves when they are not in danger. Kadyrov has called for every governor in Russia to gather up men from somewhere in some way. Now, of course, there's a proposal that the Kremlin hate, but because they need Kadyrov, he's not in danger for making it. So we've got Prigozhin's convicts and mercenaries, then we've got Kadyrov's TikTok warriors, then we've got Zolotov's National Guard, which is a sort of riot police force, and they were the guys who were incinerated with their batons on the way to police a protest with which apparently the Russian invasion, in their view, was going to be met in Kiev. Then we've got the main Russian army, and they also were coming into Ukraine in February expecting a parade, and many of them even booked restaurants in Kiev to celebrate. And then we've got the FSB and the other agencies who to a good extent despise
I've read
one
that as
another
well,
and despise all...
that they were telling the Russian brass and the Kremlin, you know, were telling the troops on the ground that they were going to be seen as liberators. And when there was a legitimate, you know, insurgency by the population to repel them as invaders, they were stunned. They couldn't believe it. I mean, that's what happens when you invade another country. God, my shoulder hurts.
All of the above listed armies. Now, if there was a divine hand in all of this, then you could say that some malign demon was prepping Russia for a potential future messy civil war. But that's for the future. Today, the main heat coming onto the regime is not from the military or from the agencies or from the opposition. It's from the ultra-nationalist, Z-loving pro-war party. Now, you're not allowed to criticize the war in Russia or even call it a war. Or are you? You see, if you're the opposition and you're against Putin and against this war, then you're silenced. But if you are pro-war but think the government is not going far enough or it's incompetently prosecuting the war, then you can criticize.
This sounds a lot like America. Like, it sounds like the same media apparatus that we have. No different. I mean, except that you know you might be beaten by the police, but you're not going to get. Well, no, that's not true anymore. Now with a lot of the new statutes, like you can get a 15-year You can get a 15-year jail sentence here just as easy as you can in Russia for protesting. It happened to people during the George Floyd riots / protests and in Baltimore. You could be gunned down by the sheriff's department and have the current president, when Trump did, was say, oh, it was a hit. It was a hit that we put out on a fucking activist and just get away with it. So I guess I really feel for these people because I'm in the same spot. Honestly, I can't tell you that if I lived in Russia, if this was America right now, I wouldn't be in the street protesting. I would be hitting a fucking highway. I'd be hitting the highway, like making my way to Mexico or Canada. Cuba. Honestly, Cuba. I would not be fucking with 15 years for screaming no war. So like salute to them and God bless them because they're braver than I am. I'd be one of the people getting the fuck out of there.
Criticize it, and moreover, you can say
I definitely wouldn't be going into
this
fucking Ukraine
operation.
fighting a war.
Let's do a
that.
proper war and
Rather die to
mobilize
do
the
that.
country. Now here is Mr. Girkin or Mr. Strelkov, and here's an ex-FSB guy who played the leading role in the annexation of Crimea and in the Russian incursion into the Donbass.
Виновно в этом поражении Министерство обороны и Генеральный штаб. Еще парочка оскорбительных военных поражений. И вот мы получаем ту самую революционную...
Yeah, this is very America, very China, where you can't criticize what the government is doing, but you can criticize how the government is trying to achieve the government's goals. So you can criticize people in the government, but not the head of the government or the government itself. This is very China, very, very US.
ситуацию. Я уверен, что в случае поражения Российской Федерации вариант с Саддамом Хусейновичем и Каддафи Муаммаром, он тоже не исключен. Не надо это самое Владимиру Владимировичу испытывать иллюзий. Не факт, что он не будет показательно унасекомлен не так, как сдавшийся Милошевич.
And it's interesting because his beliefs are just radical, extremist, genocidal lunacy, but he is actually the most coherent and consistent commentator on the pro-war side you're going to find in Russia.
Украина, так называемая, это Россия. Превратить часть России из-за собственной бездарности, тупости, безответственности и продажности в ядерную пустыню? Нет. Давайте попробуем мобилизацию провести сначала. Не говоря уже о том, что стоит нам применить ядерное оружие, мы откроем ящик Пандоры. И против нас тут же Украине передадут ядерное оружие, и она против нас его применит.
So of course what's weird isn't that this is going on. What's weird rather is that this is being allowed and even encouraged by the Kremlin. Let's look at more of it. Here is Mr. Dugin, the philosophizing radical pro-war activist whose daughter Daria Dugina was recently killed in a car bomb. Here is what Mr. Dugin has to say after Ukraine's breakthrough counteroffensive. The special military operation is over. This is war. Which is, of course, a crime in Russia to say that.
Опять же война, вернее, спецоперация.
Punishable by up to 15 years. It's time for mobilization of society, and we are now in World War III, and we have to accept.
Yeah,
you
can't criticize the war except to say that it's not going far enough. We need a complete, total war. Like that's the only criticism that they'll accept. I remember hearing this, reading about this. People talked about Vietnam because Henry Kissinger wanted to use nuclear weapons in Vietnam. Iraq, Afghanistan. Oh my God! Turn the shit into, turn the sand into glass. Like don't pussyfoot around. Kill them all. Fucking take the whole damn thing over. I remember that talk. So that's the kind of criticism that's allowed in these in Western, empire building.
So what is going on here? It's two things. First of all, these people actually could get silenced or even imprisoned or killed. Here is Peskov, Putin's spokesperson, warning these hardline radicals. As for the other points of view, critical points of view, as long as they remain within the framework of the current legislation, this is pluralism. But the line is very, very thin. You have to be very careful here. But second, the regime actually wants these messages out there. Why does it want them? Because it wants to saturate the informational environment with multiple different and contradictory messages about mobilization.
I don't know about this. This seems like 4D upside down backwards Star Wars chess is what he's talking here. I think that Occam's razor is the best case scenario here, but like sure I'll listen to him. I like this kind of gamesmanship, like political theater.
It wants to test, to poll the population and see where they're at on all of that messaging. And they've even introduced some liberal anti-war messaging too in small doses. You may have seen this guy recently, Boris Nadezhdin,
I have not
who
seen
was
this guy.
calling for peace on national state propaganda TV. So what is going on here? Some Western journalists showing professional deficiency called this rumblings of discontent. But in fact, they were nothing of the kind. They were Russian propaganda machinery just doing its thing. Nadezhdin is a guy with oppositional views who compromised himself and delivered himself into the hands of the fake opposition in Russia, that in fact acts as a kind of prop for the Putin regime, and their job's to go on the telly and say critical things without criticizing Putin himself and get pilloried and shot down by...
Okay, I take what I say back. This makes 100% sense, is what he's saying. Because we do this here in America, on American news outlets. If you're old enough to remember Hannity and Combs, Fox has Outnumbered, Crossfire on CNN. We do this all the time, where we put oppositional views, and then we let the prevailing pro-government view beat it up on live TV. So that way in your mind, you're like, well, I can't have an oppositional view because because look how easily it got defended. And this guy on TV must be smarter than me because he's on TV. So I can't have an oppositional view. But what you don't know is this guy is paid to be the Washington Generals to Sean Hannity's Harlem Globetrotters. And he's paid to get dunked on. Alan Combs is paid to get dunked on. The liberal on fucking Fox's Outnumbered is paid to get dunked on. So yeah, I take back what I said about if that's what's going on, it's 100% analogous to how we do things here in America. We're not different.
By everybody else on the show. Now, what's interesting here isn't that Nadezhdin is calling for peace. He's supposed to say that that's his job. He's not changed his mind about anything or got disillusioned by the war. What's interesting here is that he is being strategically elevated so that the peace position can be sounded out, so that afterwards the regime can poll the population and see how they're reacting to it, so they can orientate themselves a little bit about how to deal with this population that they have to manipulate into whatever they want to do next. So where are the Russian people in this? Well, experts disagree exactly about how to balance the three buckets the Russian people fall into. So let's go with the balance offered by Greg Yudin, who is a wonderful political scientist and political philosopher. First, there are the radicals, who are 15 to 25% of the population, an extremely loud minority that actively supports the war, is engaged, follows the news, and in rare cases even goes to the front lines. This is the audience of the pro-war bloggers, the Telegram channels, and vampire propagandists like Solovyov and Skabeeva. Second, there are the dissenters. They're 20 to 25% of the population, a sizable minority that categorically opposes the war. It is banned from Russian-based media and generally depressed. Third, there are the laypersons, who are 50 to 65% of the population, a passive majority that's completely depoliticized and doesn't want anything to do with politics.
Completely understand
or with the war. Now, are these three buckets static, or is there a trend taking each of them somewhere? Well, I think there are a couple of trends. One we've already seen. The ultra-radicals are getting more agitated. But the key trend that's palpable now is that that middle group, the depoliticized 50 to 65%,
are sliding
getting
in other buckets.
Increasingly bored. Yes, bored, not outraged by the war.
That
they are
again
getting more disinterested, getting more fatigued.
To drive a point home again, that's what goes on here, because people are not materially, like, when the United States goes to war, we're not materially affected, but after a while we just get bored. If you're not personally affected by the war, like you don't have family, friends and family who's over there dying and fighting and by whatever war du jour that we're in at the moment, people get bored, they get war weary, and that's exactly what happens. So I think there becomes a spot where, like, at 6 months now, people are like, what the fuck is going on in Ukraine? But if it's like Afghanistan, let's say Ukraine went on for 6 years, people in Russia wouldn't care after like year 3. That's how we treated Afghanistan. We were in Afghanistan for fucking goddamn 20 years. 20 years? And after a while, people are like, we still in Afghanistan? Yeah, dog. And they just stopped caring.
By the war as a news story. So now to Putin's dilemma. At the start of the video, I said that unless Putin wants to use nuclear weapons, he's going to have to look at significant mobilization of the population if he is to avoid a humiliating defeat. Putin's attempting to ease Russia into this gradually, calling for the mobilization of a supposedly real 300,000 reservists. Putin is lying. There is no there with this proposal. Let's define it for us. Partial mobilization means whatever the regime wants it to mean, from calling up reservists and key professionals to calling up any percentage of men they can catch. Here is how to think about this. It's a big stepping stone along Putin's way of trying to balance how to have both.
It's frog in a pot. The partial mobilization is just turning up the heat on the pot until they feel comfortable enough to go with full mobilization. Or maybe they'll get lucky. Maybe they'll get lucky and just win in Ukraine. Whatever that means to them. They'll win in Ukraine and they won't have to do full mobilization. But full mobilization is definitely on the table. He just doesn't want to say it now.
Both a passive and an activated population. The regime will hope that this is one step toward mobilization, with more steps becoming possible in the future. But I've got an important message for you, and that's that before there are any other steps, Russia has to be mobilized politically first. You can't just mobilize with a flick of a switch. And one thing I'm very comfortable to say to you as a political philosopher is that Putin, in fact, can't mobilize Russia, even if it...
Again, going back to the Vietnam example, the United States military understood this after Vietnam.
It were organizationally possible and militarily useful. He can't mobilize the country and send many more Russians to the front without first politically mobilizing the country. Political mobilization has to come first before military mobilization. If he does it the other way around, it's not going to work, and it's going to existentially threaten his rule. And this takes us to Russia's totalitarian turn, which it took after the war began. But that turn went only about 20% of the way. And then Russia didn't quite stop, but continued to travel in a totalitarian direction at the rate of 0.25 percentage point a month. That rate needs to radically increase if Putin is going to get himself into a position where he's able to ask his population to partake in mass forced mobilization. Now, why is that? It's because the Putin regime has got an informal deal with the people. The people say, look, Mr. Putin, we're going to outsource politics to you. You can start wars, you can stop wars, you can do whatever the hell you like. But there are two things you can't do. You can't take away our possibility to subsist, and you can't take possession of our bodies. You can't ask us to die for your politics that you're doing out there. And if
anybody has ever watched the movie Network, where the Mad Prophet is screaming, You know, your world's getting smaller and smaller, and you just be like, leave me alone in my home with my toaster and my TV and my steel-belted radials. And Vladimir Putin's not leaving them alone. He's coming into your living room and he's saying, I'm going to conscript your husband, your brother, yourself, your son into the war. And that's where people are screaming, you know, I'm mad as hell and I'm not going to take it anymore and I'm going to risk 15 years because what does it matter if I go get, you know, fucking my ass shot off or grandma throws a Molotov cocktail on me in Kiev and burns me to death? What do I care about 15 years in jail?
If you begin to break these two elements of the deal that we've got, Mr. Putin, then the whole system might collapse, because our perception of the legitimacy of this whole enterprise is that the regime stays out of our lives to that extent. It's not going to ask us to die for it, and it's not going to take possession of our lives and send us to the front or to some kind of labor camp. So is he breaking the deal? Yes, he is breaking the deal with his people on which the stability of his regime is predicated. A bit. Quite a bit. What he's already done will cause great resentment and a sharp decline in his perceived legitimacy. But he's not breaking the deal all the way. He's leaving himself room for maneuver and room to get lucky. Putin will hope that further escalation, up to but hopefully not including the use of non-strategic nuclear weapons, will allow him to reverse this decline in legitimacy. He'll hope to benefit from events and opportunities to come. For instance, the recognition of Ukrainian territories as Russian territories and the exploitation of that to tell Russians that they're closer to being in a full-scale war. But even if such opportunities arise, the point is Putin no longer looks invincible to anybody, including his own supporters. And
that's huge. That is very huge because, you know, off the top of your head, name the superpowers in the world, military superpowers. Go. U.S., China, Russia. Who else? Anybody? I mean, Japan's got the Peace Force. Can't count them. Who else would it be? Great Britain? You know, with military reach like that, France has nukes. But you would say China, U.S., Russia. Russia's off the table now. Like, obviously, they're not a military superpower. Obviously, they were a paper tiger, paper champion, and they're getting fucking exposed. And is the Russian psyche, is really not even the Russian people's psyche, is Putin's psyche going to be able to deal with that back seat that Russia's going to have to take? Because at the end of the day, it's like, you're not going to use nukes, hopefully, because you don't want the world to end, and your military fucking sucks. You have to hire weird mercenaries to go do your shit across the world. So can't really call you a military superpower anymore. You gotta take a back seat. You know, all that barking, no bite. And is his psyche going to be able to deal with that and be okay with that? The Russian people are going to be okay with that. It's just him. Is he going to be okay with that? Is he going to feel slighted, disrespected, and try to get a nuke off? That's what I'm concerned about.
That's really significant, because Putin is, while of course an illegitimate president, he is the only political institution in Russia with perceived legitimacy. And so when he begins to wobble, the whole system begins to wobble. The war introduced a crack into the regime. Regimes like Putin's, informational autocracies, hybrid authoritarian regimes, are not meant to fight real wars. They're meant to fight hybrid wars, the kind of wars that you can retire from the news cycle at will. And they found out that this war, you can't retire from the news cycle, no matter how much you saturate the information environment with propaganda. And forced mass mobilization, if it's done on a large enough scale, will almost inevitably introduce another crack into the regime. And this matters to us all, not just because Ukraine matters and Russian aggression matters, but because the Putin regime, with cracks and tears and in a corner, will be looking to explore the possibility of using non-strategic nuclear weapons. And that means we'd be moving to a crisis of nuclear escalation. And meanwhile, we're going to be hearing a lot more from those Z-loving radicals who want to escalate a genocidal war against Ukraine at all costs. One of them is Alexander Dugin. And to understand more about Dugin and the car bomb...
Okay. So I think we've done enough like nuclear doom and gloom for the day. But yeah, end of it, I guess to put a point on it, Ukrainian counterattack good, but also scary. Russian people good. Vladimir Putin bad. Thermonuclear war bad.